The Play Absolutely podcast with Dr. Sue Jennings and Dr. Andy Hickson. Hello again and welcome, Sue. Lovely to see you on this bright and sunny day, which is new for 2026 for us. How are you doing?
Hi. Yes, welcome everybody to Absolutely Play. We're here
Play, absolutely.
prepared to play.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've sort of touched in and out of during the podcast series so far is the sort of the specialists, the experts, the researchers, the authors on play, and there's a whole variety of people out there. Of course, you know, you're one of the leading lights in that. Now, we mentioned a few. I mean, there's Dorothy Heathcote, of course, Peter Slade, who I think you've either worked with or had some connection with. But we've got Huizinga, of course, which I'm sure you studied, or most people that have studied anything to do in this area have studied them at university. We've got, I'm going to read this because I'm not sure of the pronunciation. From China, of course, we've got Zhuangzi. We've got from India, Tagore. And from France, we've got Roger Kaiwa. Okay, very famous. And of course, people that we both know is Lev Vygotsky as well. But what I'd like to start with your permission, is what can you tell us about Dorothy Heathcote and her relationship to play?
Well, Dorothy Heathcote, who's featuring quite a lot on Facebook, I think, at the moment, almost daily, with examples of her work, made the most extraordinary contribution to drama in education. She really was a leading light, a very powerful personality, very likeable, very accessible, and she came and taught occasionally on the drama therapy training when it was at Hertfordshire College. And
So
what I
personally
liked
met her,
about
have you?
Dorothy... Sorry?
You've met her personally?
Yes, we worked together briefly, but we kept in touch. And we both had great admiration for each other's work. And she always used to say Sue took the therapeutic path and I took the educational path. And that's how she saw our work complementing each other. And we used to get very frustrated because she never actually wrote a book. And we all wanted a book of hers to be able to discuss her on courses. And it was others that actually wrote books about her much, much later that helped. But a lot of film was recorded. She made several films, especially of her own early work, when she worked in the woolen mills in the north, and her early life as a mill girl before she developed drama in education. And the way she worked was to make a drama session so real. She would walk into the middle of the room with all these children surrounding her and pick up an imaginary feather off the floor and look round and say, and who's responsible for cleaning this room? I mean, it was just extraordinary that she immediately swept you up in the moment. So, yes, I mean, it would take too long to go into all her principles in this particular context, but as a pioneer of drama education, Dorothy Heathcote was the best, no doubt about that.
Wow.
And the influence she had on other people was extraordinary.
And what you saying that, it's such, in some ways, a great shame that she didn't do a great deal of writing, which, of course, you're the opposite. You are a prolific writer. I mean, you certainly have written more than anybody else that I know. You've written more. I think the last count is over 50 books published.
But you see,
and you're still writing?
I do enjoy the creative process of writing. I don't find writing a chore. I love doing it. And it was quite
one of the
recently.
Things you've done...
Sorry?
No, carry on.
It was quite recently that I realised that I enjoyed the writing process more than the performing process. And that was quite a revelation to me, that I would sit happily for hours and forget meals and forget it was getting cold if I was writing something I was very absorbed in. So I see writing now as my creative medium, and I think with all these books I'm making up for lost time, really.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it's, I mean, what I was going to go on to say is that you have, and I remember this from the many conversations that I've sort of eavesdropped on as while I was growing up, is that you have been one of the people that have really encouraged other people to write. I mean, you certainly helped me in my writing. And helped me, initially push to get published myself. But there's an awful lot of people that you've worked with that you've encouraged to write. And one particularly, a very good friend of both of ours actually, and we mourned his sad passing some time ago, was a guy that you worked with very early on called Gordon Wiseman.
Hmm.
You remember
Indeed.
Gordy?
Yes.
And you kept on saying, do write this, write that, and you gave him opportunities to write. I think he might have done 1 or 2 chapters for you, I'm not sure. But what do you think sort of holds people back from getting their ideas down on paper? Is it that they just want to do the work rather than writing about it? They want action rather than writing? I mean, what are your thoughts there that hold people back from that?
Well, I think so often people that are performers see their work as fluid, as moving from one scene to the next, or one role to the next, or one series to the next. It's a continuing process. The only time it's held static, I suppose, is on film. Whereas when you're writing, you're committing yourself to something. On paper, you've actually made this statement, and that can be quite scary. I sometimes think, what if I wake up tomorrow morning and I disagree with what I wrote yesterday?
Right, yeah. Or if you've got it down on paper, people can always call you out on something if you've made a little mistake, or
Oh,
you
absolutely.
disagree with something you've said.
That's appeared in book reviews. I've been challenged about various things I've said over the
But
years.
for me, I think that's a good thing. To be able to have the opportunity to people to critique your work and to give you an opportunity to reflect on things that you've said. I think, for me, I think that's a good thing. I mean,
I
do
think
you like that challenge?
that's helped to shape the way I write and the way I think now. Because unless you are challenged, you could just go on outpouring and not recognise that actually you need to underscore what you've just said, or you need to give an example. You need to, is that provable, or is that your own intuition? There's so much around the interpretation of the writing, and I think that's
It's nice to
where
get out.
my course at the LSE in social anthropology was tremendously helpful, because here you were writing up things you'd observed, but people wanted to check. Well, was that actually what they were doing? Might they have been doing such and such, and so on? So I think the university challenge for me was enormously helpful.
Fabulous. Now, we've been promising our viewers that we would bring in some guests. We have our first guest today, and let's see how that works, because this is the first time that we're going to introduce somebody live. I'll give a little introduction, and we're proud. I think both of us are proud to be joined by Dr. Clive Holmwood. Clive's an associate professor in therapeutic arts at the University of Derby, a registered drama therapist and an NDP practitioner and trainer. He's got over 30 years experience across public, private and voluntary sectors. His writing and research sit at the intersection of drama, play and the creative arts therapies. He's currently developing neurodramatic play with people living with young onset dementia. And Clive, let's see if I can get you here. There we go. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Would you like to talk about one of your one of your key topics, how dementia affects memory and language, and what play can still do that other approaches often struggle to do, and why does it matter?
Yeah, certainly. Can I just intersect first?
Throw you into the deep end.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what you were talking about with Sue's encouragement of others to write. I just wanted to add very quickly that I'm a testament of that, that Sue has encouraged me from when I had my PhD published. She recommended a publisher and has supported me probably for about 15 years. So I'm one of those people who Sue has supported into continue with their writing. So I just wanted to add that to start with, because you were talking about it at the beginning. But yes, dementia. Young onset dementia is the area that we have been looking at specifically in relationship to NDP. And what I'm intrigued about with NDP in general is the idea that initially, obviously, Sue created it in relationship to thinking about children and young people's development. But actually, Sue and I have had many conversations over the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, probably longer, about NDP being something that is across the lifespan, so from birth through to death. So everyone, regardless of your age, your level of development, of the problems or challenges you have, NDP is potentially supportive to everyone. So I was particularly interested in working with some colleagues, a colleague of mine at the University of Derby, and then a colleague of mine from the University of Northampton, who's now actually works for Dementia UK. And we thought about the possibility, after each of us delivering individual lectures on working with older people, we thought of, well, actually, where does NDP sit within this? And we stumbled on or felt that a particular area worthy of consideration is what we call, as you just termed it then, Andy, young onset dementia. Now, when we think about dementia, we think about dementia as being something that affects old people. And generally, it does, older people. I think the statistics say that once you're past the age of about 80, you have a 1 in 4 chance of developing dementia. And dementia in general is something that is a massive, massive thing across society. Because people are living longer, then obviously we're getting more and more people with dementia. But young onset dementia is something that's much less understood. And the official sort of take on it is that someone with young onset dementia is someone who has a diagnosis of dementia if they're under the age of 65. Because technically in the UK, you're an older person once you're 65 or older. Although the state pension's now 67, but that's another story.
Yes.
So yeah,
I'm still classed as a young person.
Maybe you are. I wouldn't like to comment, Andy. Although I'm heading in that direction myself, of course. So there is a much smaller category of people with dementia, and these are people under the age of 65. Now, in quite rare occurrences, you can develop dementia in your 30s, in your even in your 40s, and certainly in your 50s. What they tend to be is what we call the more complex forms of dementia. So we've got we've got 2 forms of basic dementia. We've got Alzheimer's, and then we've got vascular dementia. They're the most used, but there are some other rarer forms of dementia, and they tend to be the ones that affect people under the age of 65. So what we were particularly interested in the project that we set up is that if you're under the age of 65, you're possibly in your 40s or 50s and you develop dementia, you're at a very different life stage to someone in their maybe late 70s or 80s. You might still have a young family. You might still be working. You might have a lot of social life, a lot of friends. You might have quite a busy life in your 40s and 50s. And so to suddenly get this diagnosis of dementia, how does that impact on you as an individual? And how does it also impact on those around you, your loved ones, your family, the people that support you? And so what we were interested, because we know that NDP, what NDP can do, it can kind of, it's first and foremost, one of the initial things, it's attachments based, in that the idea of NDP is that the attachments that we have in early years from caregivers, from parents, from adults around us are absolutely essential. So we wondered, actually, if you're a person in your 40s or 50s or maybe early 60s that have had this diagnosis, how does that affect your relationships with those around you? And how can we develop, if you like, playful relationships with those around you? If you're beginning to, maybe very slowly and subtly at first, to struggle with your language, you're very subtly at the beginning, you might be having problems with your physical abilities to do things, maybe making a cup of tea becomes more complicated for you. So it starts off in a very subtle way, but then it also places huge pressure on the people around you. You know, your partner, your wife, your husband, your children, who may be still teenagers or even younger, or they might be adults, but it turns upside down the process that we expect of life. You know, as we get into our very old age, our children who are adults support us, and that's a kind of natural process. But if you're in your 40s and 50s and you're starting to struggle, then that upturns the natural process of life. So we thought, well, actually, outside of all of these challenges, and the other thing I need to add is that young onset dementia is very poorly resourced, because there is a much smaller, I forget the exact numbers, but a few 100,000 people affected maybe in the UK. That I might have got that wrong, but certainly a few thousand. Might be a bit more than that, I can't remember. But there isn't the resources out there, and that's one of the things we found in our research, is that whereas if you're 65 plus and you've got dementia, the services aren't brilliant and not perfect, but they're certainly more available. But if you're under that age of 65, then actually the resources and the support you get is much more challenging. So we hear of people in their 40s or 50s having to go into a care home with people in their 80s and 90s, and it doesn't kind of quite feel right. So I cutting a very long story short.
Can I just butt in a second?
Sure, please do.
Sorry, yeah, just on that point, when you say that for the younger people that the resources are scarcer, it's not that there's less for them, it's that they're not targeted at that age group, so they have to take the resources that older people would take that might not be as appropriate. Is that my understanding is correct?
Yeah, I would say to an extent, but I think it's also a bit of a postcode lottery, because we found a brilliant resource centre in Leeds, which is where we focus some of our research, and that was a very specific resource centre for adults with young onset dementia. And that was supported by the local NHS trust. Other parts of the country have absolutely nothing specific for people with younger onset dementia. So it really depends where in the country you are and the support that you get. And we came across one gentleman who was struggling on his own in a particular area and had no support whatsoever. There are networks that support people with younger onset dementia, but it really depends where you are in the UK, and also, outside of the NHS sort of process, if you're not within the NHS process, then often a lot of the resources that potentially might be available, you just might not be aware of. So, yeah, so the idea is, I mean, the project was called Creative Support Building Bonds Through Play for People with Young Onset Dementia and Their Caregivers. So the idea was that playfulness was potentially a way of attempting to build supportive bonds between the individual with the diagnosis and their family members. It didn't kind of quite work out in the way that we'd hoped, because what we struggled is to find groups that actually we could work with, because we actually ran NDP based workshops, and we ran one in Derby and then one up in Leeds. But actually finding the groups across the UK with which we could do that work was actually really, really challenging. And again, that kind of emphasizes the kind of pick and mix postcode sort of lottery that exists for people, you know, with these sort of diagnoses.
So there aren't groups.
There are some. There are one or two very specialist centres, but it's not like they exist everywhere. It's not like, for example, you have what we call dementia cafes, which are for people with dementia, and they seem to be fairly broadly across the UK in various sort of community settings, but they generally, as far as I understand, don't really focus on people with young onset dementia, and people with young onset dementia aren't necessarily on the radar of these what we call dementia cafes. I'm not saying they wouldn't be welcome at them. I'm sure they would be, but it's just they're very much geared towards older people, I suppose. So the idea is, play an important role? So, back to you, Andy.
No, I was just going to suggest I don't know, a parallel is it would be like, in some ways, a teenager going to primary school, for example.
Yeah.
Or the other way around.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's quite an interesting analogy. But the interesting thing, the more we develop, and I've worked with Sue, and Sue was quite heavily involved in this project as supporting us. The more we look at MDP, as I said towards the beginning, the more I'm thinking, how can NDP be used as a resource across the lifespan? And and that play shouldn't. I'm sure Sue could talk to you for hours about the notion of the idea that play should not just be seen as something that children do. Adults need to play. And adults do play, of course. It's just they don't perceive it as play. So going to a football match on a Saturday and shouting and yelling at your team or the opposite team, that is play. People might not like to admit that. And going down the pub and getting drunk, having a few too many drinks, that is also a kind of play, but you wouldn't describe it as an adult as play necessarily, because adults get very touchy about play, and I'm sure Sue will have lots to say on that. Sue, do you want to come in on that? Any of that?
Well, I think we do struggle with the whole thing that play belongs to children and adults work. That adults do things seriously and children do them not seriously, which is a really sort of false dichotomy in a view of the world as a whole. And I think there is an awful lot in the news at the moment about adult games that are actually quite insidious and quite destructive and quite dark and in the shadows, and things that have crept up on us that people accept without realizing this started off as something darkly playful. So I think we've got a lot.
Yes, and we've all experienced.
Sorry?
No, I was just going to input that we've all experienced the sort of the projects maybe that we've tried to get involved in, where we introduce a bit of creativity, a bit of playfulness, and it's often described as it's not serious enough for this project. You know, we won't get the funding if we're just being seen to play around and so on. So yeah, I think we've all had some experience of that. I just wanted to just backtrack a little bit on something you said at the very beginning, Clive, where you you mentioned that NDP is something for life, from birth to death, if you like. One of the things that Sue and I talked about, I think it was in the last podcast, is that that Sue actually extended that and was the start of much of your NDP theory, is that it's actually not from birth but from conception. So
it is. That's very
NDP
correct.
can
Yes.
start.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I should have said that, but yeah, no, it's from conception.
Well, I think it's an important thing to say, because a lot of people would sort of think, play. What?
Yeah, and
The
I want to
fetus
come in here
playing as well?
because for such a long time it's been believed that life starts at birth.
Yeah.
Researchers of all kinds have largely ignored pregnancy as being a time of learning. And it's relatively recently, with the neuroscientific work and the ability to actually analyse what's going on before the infant is born, that we've come to understand how much is going on during conception.
And there's a lovely chapter in the new co-edited book that Sue and I wrote about someone who actually, Ulysses, he works with pregnant women, and a beautiful sort of chapter all about playfulness with people who are pregnant, which I think is lovely and really emphasises what Sue was just saying.
People that were pregnant.
Yeah, people that were pregnant.
And the more we could encourage that, the more we can get midwives and health visitors to be playful.
Yeah.
I'm sure would make for easier births.
Yes.
And of course,
so
you were heavily involved in
that.
that.
Something to. Yeah.
So I was just that was something that Sue was heavily involved in as a. What was the word when you were in Malaysia, weren't you, Sue?
When I was doing my anthropological research.
Yeah. Didn't you help with?
It's very much looking at the pregnancy of the Temiar people, not just the birth itself.
Clive, something I'd like to ask you,
Sure.
sort of getting into practicalities. Could you give us an example of a playful process that you might use with someone that has young onset dementia?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking back at some of the workshops that we did, and there were a team of three of us. There was myself as the drama therapist, an NDP trainer, my colleague Gemma, who was who was a movement specialist, and then my colleague Alison, who has worked in dementia for a long time but had a background in storytelling and stories. So I guess it was a combination of the use of movement and drama and storytelling. But I think the challenge when working with people with dementia is you can't come straight in and say, let's stand up and act, or let's stand up and do a play, because automatically the response you're going to get from people is, well, I'm an adult, I don't do that, or I'm not in, I don't do that, and
I'm not into games.
I'm not into games, yeah, and I'm just reminded of what one of the people in our project said to us, and they said, if you'd come in at the beginning of this project and told us what we were going to be doing, I would have ran a mile. I wouldn't. I would say, "Oh no, that's not for me. I'm not interested. I don't do that sort of thing." So, to try and answer your question, what we did is we used a structured approach whereby we sort of built things up over a period of time. So we started off with simple things like movement. Simple movements. If people felt particularly embarrassed, we'd do seated movement, so just very simple exercises, movement, and then we moved into a making process where maybe we worked with clay, for example, one week, and we got people to create things out of clay. We also got, and I know this is something that Sue loves to do, is we got people to create their own little worlds. That they. I know that Sue does this fantastic thing with shoe boxes where she creates little scenes in them. Midsummer Night's Dream, if I remember right, Sue, is what we do on the training, and we got people to sort of create these little processes, and then we brought in the idea of musical instruments. And then what we did, we developed all of this into sort of creating little characters. And in fact, in the one project in Leeds, we actually created small puppets. And basically, cutting a long story short, at the end of that sort of 10-week, 11-week process, we performed for ourselves, not for anyone else, just for ourselves. And basically, partway through that process, we brought in the notion of story. So we would look at, well, how can we develop some of these things into stories? And we had particular themes about sort of staying safe, and so we had a whole series of themes that went alongside it. I probably haven't got the time to go into all the details about that, but what we did is the whole process, we structured it in quite a similar way to the way that NDP is structured, and particularly embodiment, projection, role elements of NDP. So we built things up over a number of weeks, and each week we tried to get people to be that little bit more confident about something than they were the week before. So it's small steps, and over a period of time, people's levels of confidence just grew and grew and grew to the stage where they actually really enjoyed being involved in the creative play process. We actually used all
Well, that was
of the
going
art. Yeah, carry on, Andy.
that was going to be a question, actually. You answered it. I was going to ask you, how does play help people with early onset dementia? So, of course, building the confidence is so important.
Yeah.
Also, what a lot of people, and you touched upon it, a lot of people sort of discard having fun, enjoying yourself in an activity is something that's important. Why
Absolutely.
shouldn't we find activities that we enjoy? So are those the two sort of main things you think, that using play as an action method to help people with early onset dementia, is that the main focus, or what else can play provide for their lives that's going to be positive or improve things for them?
Well, I think the other main thing and I touched on this earlier, and again, this is central to NDP in general, is this notion of attachment. The bond or the relationships that people build with each other. And we certainly saw that in the work that we did. I mean, what our original intention was, and it didn't kind of quite work out the way we hoped. The original intention was that it was going to be bringing in the person with the diagnosis and a close family member. It might be a partner, a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter. Didn't quite work because only a couple of people actually brought in a family relative. And the original idea was that the family relative, or the partner, the supporter, is it would be about giving them an element of playfulness outside of the daily, if you like, the daily struggles that they might be finding, the daily routines. And in fact, one person who came, who was the sister of someone with dementia, what she said is she could put down everything else and forget about it for that hour where we're all being playful and creative with her brother. And for her, that was a really valuable experience. Now, unfortunately, because of the small numbers we worked with, we only had that with a couple of people. The plan had been to try and get that with everyone, but it just didn't work. But what we did find, it didn't work because we just didn't have the people to do it. But what we did find is that
Sure.
bringing together a group of 7 or 8 people with that diagnosis, it formed bonds and relationships between each of them. And this is what the arts and play does. And the thing about play is it covers all of the arts. It covers dance, it covers drama, it covers music, and anything. It covers creative writing, making puppets. All of these things are playful interactions, and it's those playful interactions that allow people, give people the permission to be creative. Because I think when we become adults, in one stupid sense, we think, well, we're not creative. Well, that's what children do. But of course we're creative. I mean, everyone is creative. It's just we don't necessarily realize that. And I think for people with these diagnoses, which are life-changing and really challenging and really difficult, then just giving them an hour to play and be playful, I think, is so important.
And I mean, you touched on something really important there, which I think, if we talk, most people maybe wouldn't recognise, is that when you're, particularly that session where you try to involve family members, it's not only about helping a specific person that has that diagnosis, but it's about helping family members. So if you can provide a session where they can all have fun together, so they're playing in an activity together where they're enjoying themselves, they're finding a new way to communicate with each other, to be with each other, to enjoy each other's company, that's got to be really valuable, especially when they're going through a lot of difficulties and stress from the diagnosis itself.
Yeah, and that's why we actually called our project Building Bonds Through Play, because the idea is, the idea is that we try and focus on the creative elements, and because as I was saying to you earlier, young onset dementia, what it actually does is it ends the natural process of how we see life.
Yeah.
You know, suddenly people are being expected to do things they weren't expecting to do, because I shouldn't have to look after my mom and dad with dementia until they're 85 and I'll be in my 60s or something, which sadly many families experience. But it's almost like that's something that we kind of expect in the future. But when it happens to someone in their, possibly even their late 30s, it's heard, people can develop those rare forms of dementia. And I remember working very much a long time ago. One of my first experiences of coming across someone like this in a hospital was a guy who was about 40 in a wheelchair with quite severe dementia, and his children were still teenagers, I think. And it kind of, how do you make sense of that? How do you manage that?
Is it something that sort of travels through your ancestor, through your lineage, through your DNA, or is it caused by sort of chemical imbalances or poisons or toxins or lifestyle?
Possibly.
What are some of the causes of?
Well, I think I have to be really careful here because I'm not medically trained, so I don't want to give out information that's incorrect or not appropriate. But I think there are some elements of genetics playing around in this. Although I think with dementia in general, there are aspects of lifestyle that might impact, diet and things like that, for example, can potentially impact
And
whether you
alcohol.
get particular kinds of, and alcohol. Yeah, I mean,
certain metals, maybe using a lot of aluminium and so on.
Yeah.
Something I've heard. I don't know if it's what's called an old wives' tale.
Yeah, but certainly the alcohol one is very true, that if you're a very heavy alcoholic drinker, that affects your brain and you can develop dementia quite early. And I have come across people that have forms of dementia that have come because of the abuse of alcohol and things like that. So certainly that. I mean, there's something called Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, which is a form of dementia.
Is that mad
And
cow disease, isn't it?
it is, yeah.
Is that another word? Yeah. Okay.
It's the posh word for mad cow disease, and I'm pretty sure the guy
Yeah.
I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, he had Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, which can affect people in their 40s, and that's incredibly sad. Whether or not that's, I mean, whether or not that is through eating meat that's affected, I couldn't comment. I don't want to comment too much on medical aspects because you'd probably need to get a medical expert to ask those questions to. But lifestyle can affect
when we had the big scare of the so-called mad cow disease in the UK, there was a lot of talk at the time that the cause of that was that they were feeding cows, dead cows, basically. So, and that included brain matter, and I think that was certainly at the time, one of the things that they said was a cause of.
And I've rarely eaten beef since. Actually, I haven't touched beef in years.
Right. But I'm vegetarian, so I've never eaten beef. Okay, Clive, it's been amazing to have you on, and such a wealth of expertise, wealth of experience.
Thank you.
We're sort of well into maybe drawing a close. One of the things that, actually, before we go into that, Sue, is there anything that you wanted to add to anything that Clive has said, or ask Clive, or anything that you think is important that that maybe he could mention before we draw this to a close?
What I welcome is that Clive has drawn attention to the importance of researching Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, particularly early onset, because it is a neglected area where there is not enough investment in actually understanding something that can, as you rightly say, totally disrupt somebody's life. Yeah, and upends it completely of what is expected at that sort of age. So I think maybe, Andy, we've realised that one feature perhaps of our podcast, whichever way it goes, is to highlight issues that need attention, and that perhaps people can contribute and write in about them. And I must class myself as fortunate in my 80s that I'm, at the moment, brain healthy. But I want to thank you, Clive, very much for your contribution. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, Clive, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank Sue, because Sue was part of an expert panel to support the research project. So we had Sue and we had 2 or 3 people on our expert panel. They were who themselves were people with dementia, but young onset dementia, and they came alongside us to offer their guidance and their support about how to do this research. And I think it's really important when you set up any kind of research that you involve people with the condition as part of the research team. So Sue and I think about 3 other people. We had 2 people with young onset dementia and someone who had experience of a relative with dementia. They were our expert team they would come in. We met them about once every 3 months across a couple of years, and they would say, oh, you don't want to send out information like this because someone with young onset dementia won't understand what that means, or you need to simplify this, or you need to change the language. Because, for example, they didn't like the idea of carer. So I think we put there someone caregivers. I think we got to, but carer suggests that it's someone that cares for them. Whereas one of our colleagues said, "My wife's my wife. She's not my carer." So it's little subtle things like that we had to really understand. And of course, Sue came in with her NDP expertise as well. And Sue, we need to talk further about this because there are ideas to develop this research further. And I have not had a chance to discuss that with you yet, but we will at some stage in the future.
Great.
Hear that live on air first.
Yeah, live on air.
So, Clive, one of the ways we end the session or end each podcast, is by giving our viewers an example of a playful activity,
Okay.
or a game of some kind that might help people in their lives, whether it's if they're struggling with a mental health condition, a physical, or any kind of something that's affecting their life and making them miserable or difficult. I'll give you a chance to think of something. So we'll go to Sue first. What's your suggestion for people in this episode, Sue?
Well, I'd like to go back to basics and just to remind everybody the importance of breathing. That so often, if we're anxious,
you did that lovely exercise, didn't you, last time?
Absolutely. It's such a simple breathing exercise that I think, when we're shocked or we're stopped in our tracks or we're suddenly in pain or something sudden, back to the body, back to breathing.
Back to the body, back to breathing.
That's where it all starts.
Has that given you enough time, Clive, to think of something?
Well, yeah, I mean, kind of connected to what Sue has. I'm going to hold up something that's literally in front of me, and this is a little miniature dinosaur. But this is a squeezy dinosaur, and as you squeeze it, I mean, some people might not. That might put some people off. But I guess the idea of grounding yourself and touching something that's soft and squeezy or mushy, just the idea of squeezing something in your hand. It might be, for example, clay, if you like playing with clay, and I know some people find that really difficult. Yeah, some people love it, some people hate it, but just the idea of having something that you can squeeze or squish, and it's just it seems to affect the system. The moment you squeeze or squash something in your hand, it just again goes back to the breathing, I suppose. It was just sat on my desk randomly in front of me.
For those viewers of ours that might be a bit squeamish, you sort of mentioned clay. I mean, I love working with clay. I mean, even you could say you could have great fun like just squishing jelly and stuff like that, although that might also be a waste of food. But for those that are squeamish to with your dinosaur, you've got that weird stuff coming out of it.
Yeah.
Of course, we've always got the famous stress ball. I mean, that's been with us for quite a while now. That's squishy. That's a lovely thing to have. In fact, I would recommend some kind of stress ball you have in your pocket or your bag, you carry around, because we all feel stressed at times. And if you've got something that can help relieve that, some kind of fidget toy, but soft, rather than a hard, I think is great. Yeah.
This actually sat in my coat.
My suggestion this week.
This sat in my coat pocket for quite some time after a session I'd done with a child, and then I just discovered it one day in my pocket, and it stayed there for quite a long time, so I could just squeeze it. Then it ended up on my desk here.
Okay, Clive, again, thank you ever so much for taking time out to come and play with us. Thank you
for the invitation.
Sue, you're absolutely most welcome. Our first guest on the Play Absolutely podcast. If you've enjoyed today's, please give us a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That helps us grow. And please leave us some thoughts, some questions. What would you like us to talk about as regards play? We're going to bring you more guests in 2026. So this is Andy, Sue and Clive saying goodbye and thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.